A millimeter is a canyon if you know how to look at it. Most people don't. They look at a piece of steel and see a solid, unmoving thing. I look at it and see tolerances. I see exactly where it will fail when the pressure hits. People are like that too. There's always a microscopic gap between who people are and who you need them to be. And if you put enough pressure on that gap, they fracture. I learned that the hard way in a cinder block shop in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I didn't yell when it happened. I went very, very quiet. I didn't break anything. I just did what I do best. I measured the fracture, and I built a way to fix it. Welcome back to the channel. We tell stories here, real ones, about the kind of quiet storms that tear through a family and leave the landscape permanently changed. We talk about betrayal, but more importantly, we talk about the patience required to set things right. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor, subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. My name is Elias. For the last 40 years, I've run a precision machining shop down in the Menomonee Valley. It's an old building, the kind where the smell of cutting fluid and hot metal is permanently baked into the brickwork. We have cracked concrete floors and the heavy rhythmic thumping of CNC mills and Bridgeport lathes. I like it that way. Cleverness is fast. What I do is slow. I measure things. I have this 1978 Mitutoyo dial caliper. Kept it in the same battered pine box for 4 decades. The glass on the dial is a little scratched, but it still reads true down to the thousandth of an inch. That's the thing about good tools. They don't lie to you. They tell you exactly what you have in your hands, whether you like the answer or not. I use that caliper to build components for aerospace contractors, medical devices, and for the last 7 years, my own project. A variable flow rotary valve. It was designed to reduce energy waste in industrial systems by a massive margin. It was my retirement plan, my legacy, something I was building quietly, mostly on weekends, in the back corner of the shop, under a flickering fluorescent bulb. I didn't have kids of my own. My sister passed away when her son Caleb was 14. His dad wasn't in the picture, so Caleb came to live with me. I didn't know the first thing about raising a teenager. I just treated him like a new apprentice. I gave him a broom, showed him how to sweep the aluminum shavings, and eventually I taught him how to run the machines. He was smart, too smart, maybe, beautiful the way certain storms are beautiful, full of energy but completely unpredictable. He picked up the software side of things faster than I ever could. By the time he was 22, he was writing G-code that made my old machines sing. But Caleb didn't want to be a machines. He hated the grease and the slow process of proving out a part. He wanted to be a founder. He spoke in buzzwords: synergy, disruption, scalability. Fine is a word that sounds like a compliment, but isn't, and Caleb thought everything I did was just fine. He thought my valley shop was a graveyard for ambition. About a year ago, Caleb's attitude shifted. He had been bouncing between failed app startups, living in an apartment I was quietly paying half the rent for. Suddenly, he started coming around the shop more often. He brought me coffee. 2 sugars, no cream. He'd lean against the workbench and ask about the rotary valve. He wanted to know how it worked, how close I was to a prototype, what the market size looked like. I was thrilled. I mean that literally. I thought my boy was finally taking an interest in the family trade. I spent hours walking him through the CAD files. I showed him the thermodynamic simulations on my desktop. I let him hold the first physical prototype. I remember that day clearly. It was a Tuesday, pouring rain outside, making the shop feel like a bunker. He turned the heavy metal valve in his hands, his eyes darting the way they did when he calculated money. "This is a gold mine, Uncle E," he said. "You could disrupt the whole sector." I just chuckled, wiped my hands on a shop rag, and told him it wasn't about disrupting anything. It was about making a machine run cleaner. When he said that, I noticed something in my stomach shifted. That was the first red flag. But you ignore red flags when you're looking at family. You just pretend it's a trick of the light. 2 months later, my primary hard drive failed, the one containing the master CAD files and the testing data. I wasn't panicked. I had backups on an encrypted off-site server. I called Caleb to see if he could help me restore the terminal. He stood there in his pristine white sneakers, looking at my dead monitor. Wow, Uncle Eli, that's a total loss. Did you have any backups? His voice was perfectly smooth, but his jaw was doing that thing. That slow grinding thing he did when he was bluffing at poker. I felt my thumb move. I started rubbing it against the edge of my index fingernail. Very, very slowly. It's a habit I have when the math doesn't add up. When someone is selling me a dimension that I know is out of tolerance. No, I lied. No backups. Looks like I'll have to start from scratch. He put a hand on my shoulder. It felt light, almost rehearsed. Man, that's brutal. I'm so sorry. That night, after he left, I didn't go home. I stayed in the dark shop. I pulled up my server logs. Someone had accessed the local drive, copied the entire directory for the rotary valve project, and then triggered a remote wipe of the physical disk. The IP address traced back to a cafe 3 blocks from Caleb's apartment. The timestamp was 2:11 a.m., the previous night. I sat in my car for a while. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something in my chest did a thing it had never done before. It hardened, like steel getting quenched in oil. The next morning, I didn't confront him. Instead, I drove over to the east side of town to see Marcus. Marcus and I served together in the 82nd Airborne back in the day. He was a supply sergeant who could find water in the desert. Now he's a patent attorney with a corner office and a suit that costs more than my truck. You look like you swallowed a spark plug, Eli, he said, not looking up from his paperwork. I walked over and sat down. I placed the worn pine box containing my Mitutoyo caliper on his glass desk. Then I laid down a thick manila folder next to it. Marcus, I said, my voice completely level. I need to know exactly how bulletproof our filings are, because my nephew just stole my life's work. Marcus finally stopped writing. He slowly capped his pen, looked at the pine box, and then looked at me. The silence sat like a fifth guest in the room. Marcus didn't immediately answer. He has this mahogany desk that is completely clear of clutter. No family photos, no novelty paperweights, just a legal pad and whatever file he is currently destroying. He opened the thick manila envelope I had set down. He spent 4 very long minutes reading through the documents. The only sound in the room was the heavy ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, and the faint hum of downtown traffic outside his 14th floor window. I sat perfectly still. I wasn't anxious. Anxiety requires uncertainty, and I already knew exactly what was in that envelope. I just needed my friend to confirm the caliber of the ammunition I was holding. Finally, Marcus closed the folder. He took off his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. Elias, he said, his voice dropping into that gritty baritone he used back when we were managing logistics in the sand. Tell me, you didn't bait him into this. I didn't bait him, I said. I left the door unlocked. He chose to walk in and take the furniture. Marcus tapped the folder. Filing date is November 12th of last year. Provisional application for the variable flow rotary valve architecture. And the full utility patent. He checked a second sheet of paper. Approved and issued as of 3 weeks ago. You are the sole inventor. You own 100% of the intellectual property. It is ironclad, Eli. I wrote these claims myself. They are broad enough to cover the core concept and specific enough to strangle any knockoffs. If your nephew tries to commercialize this, he is walking barefoot into a minefield. He already stole the CAD files, I told him. He wiped my local drive. He thinks I have nothing but a dead hard drive and a bad memory. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, studying me. We can send a cease and desist tomorrow. We can draft an injunction. I can have a process server. Hand him a stack of papers so thick it'll break his wrist before he even incorporates a company. We can end this right now, Eli. I looked at the worn pine box on the desk. My Mitutoyo caliper. I thought about Caleb turning 14, standing in my driveway with his life packed into 2 garbage bags. I thought about teaching him how to read a micrometer. And then I thought about the smooth, rehearsed sound of his voice when he looked at my blank computer screen, and feigned sympathy. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No, cease and desist. If we spook him now, he'll just delete the files and claim he never had them. He'll walk away and find someone else to bleed. I need him to build it. I need him to attach his name to it. I want him to sign the incorporation papers, take the investor money, and stand on a stage claiming he invented it. I want the trail of fraud to be so thick, so undeniable, that he can never walk it back. Marcus stared at me for a long time. Then he nodded. Just once. You're letting him build his own gallows. I'm just a machinist, Marcus. He's the one who wanted to be a founder. For the next 4 months, I played the part of the defeated, obsolete old man. It wasn't entirely an act. My shop felt different. The air was heavier. I went back to cutting aerospace parts, running the CNC mills, and pretending my life's work was gone. Caleb, meanwhile, went to work. It turns out, when you have a stolen, fully engineered, revolutionary industrial design, it is very easy to get people to give you money. He didn't know I was watching, but in the digital age, nobody is really invisible if you know where to look. I set up Google alerts. I tracked the local business registries. It took him exactly 62 days to incorporate. He called it Apex Flow Dynamics. By day 90, he had secured a $2.8 million seed round, led by a venture capital firm out of Chicago. He was the CEO, the founder, the visionary. I read the press release online, while sitting in my office, eating a cold turkey sandwich. The article quoted Caleb talking about his eureka moment, late one night, and how he was driven to revolutionize energy efficiency. I will not be taking questions about how that made me feel. I just took a bite of my sandwich and crubbed my thumb against the edge of my index fingernail, very, very slowly. The real masterpiece of his deception came 2 weeks later. He actually invited me to his new office. A startup incubator is just a casino with better lighting. I walked into this massive, open-plan warehouse downtown. It had exposed brick glass walls, neon signs, and young people sitting on ergonomic chairs, drinking $4 coffees. It was a place designed for people who talked about work instead of actually doing it. Caleb met me in the lobby. He was wearing a tailored blazer over a vintage band t-shirt, looking every inch the tech prodigy. He gave me a hug. It was tight, affectionate, completely hollow. "Uncle Eli, I'm so glad you came," he said, beaming. "I wanted you to see this. I know things have been hard since you lost your data, so I wanted to show you what I've been working on. I wanted to share the win." He walked me through the glass doors. He introduced me to his team. He called me his biggest inspiration. Then, he led me into a conference room and showed me a glossy 3D printed model of the rotary valve, my rotary valve. He had changed the outer housing, made it look sleeker, more modern, but the internal geometry, the exact angles of the impeller blades, the specific pressure tolerances were mine. I recognized the math. It was like looking at my own handwriting on a forged check. "We're calling it the Apex Core," Caleb said, his hands resting proudly on the table. "We've already got provisional patents filed." I almost smiled. Almost. Which, if you know me, is the closest thing to a miracle. You can't patent something that already has an active granted utility patent under another name. But the patent office is slow, and the venture capitalists hadn't done a deep enough forensic dive into the IP yet. They trusted his provisional filing. "It looks incredible, Caleb," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. I reached out and touched the plastic model. "You really designed all this yourself?" He didn't even blink. "Took a lot of late nights. But yeah, it just kind of came to me. You know how it is, Uncle Ei. Sometimes the machine just speaks to you." My jaw tightened. Yes, I know exactly how it is. I looked closely at the central bearing housing on the 3D model, and that was when I saw it. The beautiful fatal flaw. When Caleb stole my CAD files, he copied the entire directory, but he didn't understand the directory. He stole version 4.2. I was already on version 7.1. Version 4.2 looked perfect on a computer screen. The fluid dynamics software simulated it flawlessly, but software doesn't feel vibrations. Software doesn't know what happens to 316 liters, stainless steel, when it spins at 4,000 RPM under extreme thermal load. I knew because I had built a physical prototype of version 4.2 and it had catastrophically failed. It possessed a harmonic resonance issue without a microscopic asymmetrical offset in the main bearing, an offset I hadn't added to the CAD files until version 6. The valve would vibrate, seize, and completely lock up within 3 minutes of running at full industrial pressure. He had stolen a bomb, and he thought it was a gold bar. "We are doing a massive launch day showcase next month," Caleb said, oblivious to the fact that I was inspecting his impending doom. "The lead investors are flying in from Chicago. We're doing a live, pressurized demonstration of the first machined prototype. I want you to be there, in the front row, as my VIP guest." He was offering me a front row seat to watch him steal my legacy. He wanted the old man to clap for him. I looked up from the model. Our eyes met. He looked so confident, so utterly convinced of his own genius. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just gave him a slow, measured nod. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Caleb," I said. "I'll be right there watching." I walked out of Caleb's glass-walled incubator into the glaring afternoon sun and felt a strange sense of calm, the kind of calm that settles over you when the tornado has finally touched down, and all you have to do is watch the path it takes. I drove my truck back to the east side, parked in the loading zone of Marcus's building, and took the elevator up to the 14th floor. I didn't have an appointment, but the receptionist, a sharp-eyed woman named Helen, who had known me for a decade, took one look at my face and buzzed me straight back. Marcus was on a conference call. I walked into his office, sat down in the leather guest chair, and waited. He wrapped up the call, hung up the receiver, and leaned across the desk. "He's building it," I said. Marcus picked up his pen. "The exact design. Version 4.2, I replied, crossing my arms. He copied the directory from my hard drive 7 months ago. He didn't take the time to understand the math. He just took the files, rendered them in a glossy 3D format, and sold it to Chicago venture capitalists as a finished product." Version 4.2, Marcus repeated, tapping the pen against his legal pad. He knew my numbering system. He had spent enough time in my shop drinking lukewarm coffee to know how I worked. "Remind me about 4.2, Eli. That was the one we tested last January, wasn't it?" "It was," I said. "The one with the symmetrical main bearing housing, the one that suffers from severe harmonic resonance the moment it crosses 3,000 RPM under load. It creates a micro-vibration that compounds exponentially. Within a few minutes, the shaft seizes, the seals blow out, and the entire unit structurally compromises. In plain English, Marcus, the machine tears itself apart from the inside." Marcus stared at me. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. It was the same grin I used to see right before he coordinated an artillery strike back in the military. He is taking a live, flawed prototype to a stage presentation in front of his lead investors. He is, next month. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "But him looking like a fool isn't enough, Marcus. If the machine breaks, he'll just tell the investors it's a minor setback. He'll ask for more time, more runway. They'll hire real engineers to troubleshoot it. And eventually, they will figure out the offset bearing issue. They have $2.8 million to throw at the problem. I need him trapped before he can pivot." "You want the paper trail," Marcus said, his tone shifting back to pure surgical business. "You want proof of fraud, not just engineering incompetence." "Exactly. I need to prove that he explicitly claimed ownership of my intellectual property in order to secure that funding. I need the documents where he lied to the people writing the checks." Here is the thing about venture capital. It looks like a wild, fast-moving game of throwing money at ideas, but underneath, it is built on a mountain of legally binding paperwork. Investors don't just hand you a check because you give a good speech. They make you sign representations and warranties. They make you sign documents legally swearing that you own the IP you are commercializing, that it does not infringe on any existing patents, and that you did not acquire it through illicit means. "The firm is Vanguard Horizon out of Chicago," Marcus said. pulling up a database on his computer. If they led a seed round of that size, they filed a Form D with the SEC. It's a Regulation D offering. That gives us the corporate structure. But the actual investor prospectus, the pitch deck, the signed IP warranties, those are private. I can't just subpoena them yet because we haven't filed a lawsuit. Then how do we get them? We play the game, Marcus said quietly. I have a junior partner at a firm in Chicago. We use him to approach Vanguard Horizon. He represents an anonymous secondary buyer looking to acquire early equity in promising green tech hardware startups. Apex Flow Dynamics fits the profile. He requests the due diligence packet to evaluate a potential secondary buyout of a minority stake. It's standard practice. They'll make him sign an NDA, but the NDA won't cover shielding the disclosure of a felony. I sat back in my chair. Do it. For the next 3 weeks, I went to work every single day. I turned on the lights in the Menomonee Valley shop. I put on my canvas apron. I loaded raw aluminum stock into the CNC mills, checked my tooling, and ran my production quotas. I measured parts with my 1978 Mitutoyo caliper. I didn't say a word to anyone about my nephew. I didn't send Caleb a single angry text message. I didn't demand explanations. Kindness is often mistaken for weakness, and silence is almost always mistaken for ignorance. People think if you aren't screaming, you aren't fighting. They don't understand that the most dangerous people in the room are the ones who are just checking the math. Every few days, Caleb would text me, "Hey, Uncle Ei, hope you're having a good week. The shop treating you well. Just finalized the catering for launch day. You're going to love it. Can I wait to show you what the future looks like?" I replied to every single one. Short, polite, perfectly civil. Looking forward to it. Keep up the hard work. I wanted him to feel completely safe. I wanted him to be so comfortable standing on the trap door that he decided to jump up and down on it. On the Tuesday before the launch, Marcus drove out to my shop. He didn't wear a suit this time. He was wearing jeans and a heavy jacket, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He walked past the screaming lathes and met me at my workbench in the back. He didn't say hello. He just unzipped the portfolio and slid a stack of high-gloss paper onto my desk. "Due diligence packet from Vanguard Horizon," Marcus said over the noise of the machines, "including the technical appendix and the signed founder's warranties." I wiped my hands on a rag and picked up the document. I flipped to the 4th page. There it was, Caleb's signature in blue ink, directly beneath a paragraph stating that he, the founder, was the sole and exclusive creator of the variable flow rotary valve architecture, and that no other party held any claim, patent, or prior art regarding the core mechanics. It was a federal offense written in plain English. "We have him," I said. "We have him," Marcus confirmed. The moment that machine goes public, the moment he uses it to solicit further investment or demonstrate commercial viability, the trap snaps shut. I have the injunction drafted. I have the patent ownership documents certified. I have a courier standing by. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. The day of the launch was a Thursday. Caleb had rented out a massive decommissioned water treatment facility on the edge of the city. It was the perfect industrial chic aesthetic for a tech startup pretending to be blue-collar. When I arrived, the parking lot was full of luxury SUVs and sleek imported sedans. Inside, the cavernous room was bathed in dramatic blue lighting. There was a catered open bar, a DJ playing ambient electronic music, and rows of black folding chairs facing a raised steel platform. In the center of the platform sat the Apex core. It was beautiful, I'll admit that. They had machined the outer housing out of a solid billet of 316 liters stainless steel. It gleamed under the spotlights. Thick, heavy-duty industrial hoses were connected to the intake and output valves, hooked up to a massive commercial water pump designed to simulate the extreme pressure of a municipal utility grid. It looked like a piece of the future, but looking at it, I felt a deep, cold certainty in my bones. It was a beautifully painted corpse. I took my seat in the front row. The chair had a little reserve tag on it. VIP Elias, founder's uncle. I sat down and rested my hands on my knees. Next to me sat a row of men and women in expensive, understated clothing. The Chicago investors. They were holding sleek tablets, reviewing their notes, speaking in low, confident tones about market capture and fluid dynamic disruption. At exactly 2 p.m., the ambient music faded. The crowd of about 100 people went quiet. Caleb walked onto the stage. He was wearing a dark turtleneck and a wireless headset microphone. He looked out at the audience, smiling that bright, rehearsed smile. His eyes found me in the front row, and he gave me a subtle nod, a nod of triumph, a nod that said, "Look at what I built while you were sweeping floors. Welcome." Caleb's voice echoed through the massive room. For decades, industrial energy waste has been accepted as an unavoidable cost of doing business. Today, Apex Flow Dynamics changes that. Today, we don't just theorize about efficiency, we demonstrate it. He gestured to the shining steel machine behind him. He signaled to a technician standing by the massive industrial water pump. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caleb said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, "let's pressurize the system." The technician threw the heavy breaker switch. The massive pump roared to life, sending a massive high-velocity surge of pressurized water directly into the stolen heart of my machine. The internal impeller began to spin, 1,000 RPM, 2,000 RPM. I sat perfectly still, my eyes locked on the stainless steel housing, waiting for the sound I knew was coming. At 2,000 RPM, the machine sounded like the future. It had a low, powerful hum that vibrated through the concrete floor and into the soles of my boots. The water pump was pushing 120 psi, simulating a heavy municipal load, and the Apex core was handling it beautifully. The investors in the front row were nodding. One of them, a man in a sharp charcoal suit with a silver watch, leaned over and whispered something to his colleague. They were looking at a spreadsheet on an iPad, probably calculating their return on investment. Caleb stood next to the machine, his hands clasped behind his back, looking like a king surveying his newly conquered territory. But I am a machinist. I don't listen to the hum. I listen to the spaces between the hum. At 2,500 RPM, the pitch changed. It wasn't obvious to anyone else in the room. To the venture capitalists, it just sounded like a machine working harder, but to me it sounded like a dentist's drill grazing a nerve. It was a microscopic, high-frequency whine. The symmetrical bearing was beginning to fight the fluid dynamics. The water wanted to move in a vortex, but the perfectly centered housing was forcing it into a rigid, unnatural path. It was a war of physics, and physics never loses. At 3,000 RPM, the harmonic resonance became visible. The heavy steel platform beneath the machine began to vibrate, just a little at first. A tiny ripple appeared in the complimentary glasses of ice water sitting on the investor's table. Caleb's smile tightened slightly. I saw his jaw doing that slow, grinding thing. He stepped a few inches away from the machine and tapped his wireless earpiece. "Smooth it out," he hissed, trying to keep his voice down, but I could read his lips perfectly. He was telling the technician to adjust the flow rate. But you cannot smooth out a fundamental structural flaw with a software command. You can't code your way out of bad geometry. 3,200 RPM. The screech was now audible to everyone. It was a brutal, metallic scraping sound that echoed off the high warehouse ceilings. The investors stopped looking at their iPads. The man in the charcoal suit frowned and shifted in his seat, just clearing the initial air pockets. Caleb announced into his microphone, his voice overly bright, "Standard pressurization protocol." It wasn't a standard protocol. At 3,400 RPM, the internal shaft reached critical mass. The rotational energy, trapped by the harmonic vibration, had absolutely nowhere left to go. The failure didn't happen slowly. It happened with a sound like a shotgun, going off inside a metal trash can. The main bearing seized instantly. The sudden stoppage transferred all that violent kinetic energy directly into the outer housing. 4 half-inch titanium mounting bolts sheared off simultaneously, snapping like dry twigs. The sudden structural collapse blew out the primary high-pressure seal. A geyser of atomized water and industrial coolant erupted from the side casing with the force of a fire hose. The spray arced 20 feet into the air, raining down over the stage in a heavy, foul-smelling mist. Caleb took the brunt of it. His tailored blazer was instantly soaked. The cold water hit his face, slicking his hair down to his forehead. His wireless microphone shorted out, with a loud, sharp pop, emitting a burst of static that made the front row wince and cover their ears. The emergency shut-off sensors on the massive water pump finally engaged, and the motor groaned to a heavy mechanical halt. The ambient electronic music had been cut. The machine was dead. The only sound left in the cavernous room was water dripping from the overhead lights and pooling onto the cold concrete floor. The smell of hot, sheared metal and chemically treated coolant filled the air. The silence had weight to it. It was heavy, embarrassing, and absolute. Nobody said anything for a while. I didn't flinch during the explosion. I hadn't moved to cover my face. I just sat perfectly still in my VIP chair, my hands resting comfortably on my knees, watching the dirty water pool around my nephew's extremely expensive shoes. Just a minor calibration issue, everyone, Caleb stammered. His voice was raw and thin without the amplification of the microphone. He wiped a mixture of water and grease from his eyes, his hands shaking visibly. A secondary seal gave way. It happens in alpha testing. We'll have the backup swapped in and running in 10 minutes. I stood up. I didn't rush. I walked up the 3 steel steps onto the wet platform. The water was slick, but my work boots had tread designed for shop floors coated in cutting oil. I walked right past Caleb. He looked at me, a mixture of pure panic and sudden anger flashing across his wet face. "Uncle Eli, what are you doing?" he whispered frantically, grabbing my arm. "You need to sit down. You're ruining the optics." I looked at his hand on my sleeve. He let go. "The optics," I repeated, my voice calm and conversational. "Caleb, you just sheared 4 structural bolts and blew a high-pressure manifold in front of the people paying for your apartment. The optics are already wet." I walked over to the ruined apex core. The stainless steel housing was radiating intense heat. A thin wisp of gray smoke was curling out from the cracked bearing mount. I reached into the inside pocket of my canvas jacket. I pulled out the battered pine box. I unlatched it and carefully lifted out my 1978 Mitutoyo dial caliper. "What the hell is that?" Caleb demanded, taking a step toward me. I held up one hand, just one. He stopped dead in his tracks. I leaned over the smoking machine. I set the jaws of the caliper against the exposed, ruined bearing mount. I dialed it in tight, adjusting the thumb roller until it gripped the metal perfectly. I lifted it up and looked at the glass dial. "Perfectly symmetrical," I said. I didn't yell, but my voice carried easily across the dead quiet room. 3.000 inches on all sides, beautiful on a computer monitor, completely deadly in reality. The man in the charcoal suit stood up from the front row. He wiped a few stray drops of water off his iPad. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the sharp edge of a man who managed billions of dollars. "Who are you, and what exactly are you measuring?" I turned to face him. I wiped the jaws of the dial caliper on my sleeve, placed it meticulously back into its pine box, and returned it to my pocket. "My name is Elias," I said. "I am a machinist from the Menomonee Valley, and I am the architect of this machine. I've been building it for 7 years." A collective murmur rippled through the rows of folding chairs. Caleb's face went from pale to paper white. He's confused." Caleb stuttered, stepping between me and the investors. "He's my uncle. He works in a garage. He cuts aluminum blocks for a living. He doesn't know anything about fluid dynamics or the engineering behind this IP. I know that at 3,000 RPM. A perfectly symmetrical bearing housing creates a harmonic resonance that destroys a central titanium shaft in under 4 minutes," I said quietly, looking past Caleb directly into the investor's eyes. "I know this because I built this exact prototype last January. And it blew up on my workbench exactly the way it just blew up on your stage. I turned slowly to look at my nephew. Here's the thing about stealing CAD files off an old man's local hard drive in the middle of the night, Caleb. You only get the version he saved on that specific disk. You don't get the fixes he keeps in his head. In version 6 of this design, I added a 0.04-inch asymmetrical offset to the main housing. It stabilizes the internal pressure. You didn't know that, because you didn't engineer this machine. You just copy-pasted it. This is insane, Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Security, get him off the stage. He's lying. He's a bitter old man trying to steal my spotlight. He isn't lying. A deep, authoritative voice echoed from the back of the room. Every head turned. Marcus was walking down the center aisle. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, carrying his slim leather portfolio. He walked with the slow, measured pace of a man who owned the building. He didn't even glance at Caleb. He walked straight to the front row and stopped directly in front of the man in the charcoal suit. Marcus Vance, Intellectual Property and Corporate Litigation, Marcus said, extending a hand. Sterling, the investor replied cautiously, shaking it. Vanguard Horizon. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, unzipping his portfolio. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled, watermarked documents and handed them over. What you are holding is the fully approved, federally issued utility patent for the variable flow rotary valve architecture sitting broken on that stage. It was filed last November. It was granted to my client, Elias, as the sole and exclusive inventor. Sterling looked down at the documents. He was a professional. He knew exactly what he was looking at. His eyes scanned the claims, his face hardening into a mask of pure, cold fury. This patent covers the exact mechanical structure of the apex core. It covers everything except the fatal design flaw. Marcus corrected smoothly. He then reached into his portfolio a second time. And this, Mr. Sterling, is a certified copy of the due diligence packet your firm executed with Apex Flow Dynamics. Specifically, Page 4, the founder's warranties. Think about that for a second. In the span of 6 minutes, Vanguard Horizon watched their multi-million-dollar prototype violently self-destruct, learned their visionary CEO couldn't do basic math, and realized they were holding signed fraudulent documents that constituted a massive federal crime. Sterling stared at the signature page. He looked up at Caleb. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. You signed a legally binding representation, Sterling said, his voice dangerously quiet, warranting that you were the sole creator of this technology. You warranted that it infringed on no existing patents. You took $2.8 million of our fund's capital based on that signature. I tweaked it, Caleb pleaded, backing up against the wet steel railing. I changed the outer housing. I updated the UI on the control software. The IP is distinct. I swear we can fight this in court. You changed the paint job on a stolen car, I interrupted quietly. I walked to the edge of the stage, standing right above him. The confidence, the buzzwords, the arrogance, it was all completely gone, stripped away by a single sheet of paper and a broken bearing. He looked exactly like the 14-year-old boy who had showed up in my driveway years ago, scared and empty. But I couldn't fix him with a broom and a workbench this time. You didn't disrupt anything, Caleb, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but in that silent warehouse, it sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. You just built a very expensive bomb, and you signed your own name to the wreckage. Sterling didn't yell. Men who manage billion-dollar portfolios do not throw tantrums when they are crossed. They simply execute protocols. I watched him carefully slide the stapled documents back into his leather briefcase and snap the brass locks shut. The sound echoed over the dripping water. He turned to his assistant, a young man who looked like he had forgotten how to breathe, and gave 3 quiet instructions. Call Chicago. Freeze the remaining escrow capital immediately. Get our litigation team on a conference line. Sterling didn't even look at Caleb as he turned to leave. He just walked down the center aisle, his expensive shoes splashing slightly in the puddles of chemically treated coolant. The other investors followed him in absolute silence. They left their complimentary coffees and their glowing iPads on the folding chairs. They didn't ask for their coats. Within 2 minutes, the entire front row had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the heavy scent of sheared metal and a profound, suffocating emptiness. The catered staff in the back were standing perfectly still, holding trays of appetizers, unsure if they were supposed to start cleaning or just run. Caleb was still standing on the steel platform. He was soaked to the bone, water dripping from the hem of his tailored blazer, his vintage band t-shirt plastered to his chest. His hands hung at his sides, fingers twitching slightly, like they were desperately searching for a keyboard to undo the last 10 minutes. But there is no Control-Z in the physical world. When a machine breaks, it stays broken until someone puts in the labor to fix it. He looked down at me. The arrogance, the corporate buzzwords, the smooth rehearsed charm, it had all been stripped away by the violent reality of physics. He looked exactly like the 14-year-old boy who had showed up in my driveway with 2 garbage bags of clothes, terrified of the world, and trust me, seeing that broke my heart. I mean that literally. Something inside my chest cracked, a hairline fracture that I knew would never fully heal. "Uncle Eli," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly it cracked on the second syllable. He stepped off the platform, closing the distance between us. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. You have to tell them we're partners. I'm your nephew. You raised me." I looked at him. I didn't step back, but I didn't reach out to hold him either. I raised a machinist. "Caleb," I said, keeping my voice very, very quiet. "I taught a boy how to measure things, how to respect tolerances. How to respect tolerances. How to understand that if you lie to a piece of steel, it will eventually break and hurt someone. I don't know who you are. The man standing in front of me is a stranger who broke into my shop in the middle of the night and tried to steal my life. I just wanted to make it big." He pleaded, tears mixing with the industrial coolant on his face. "I wanted to prove I could do something massive. I was going to cut you in. I swear, once the Series A funding cleared, I was going to give you a massive payout. I was doing this for us." I rubbed my thumb against the edge of my index fingernail, very, very slowly. "Fine is a word that sounds like a compliment but isn't," I said. "And your apologies sound just like that. You weren't doing anything for us. You were building a monument to yourself using my bricks. And when you realized you didn't know how to mix the mortar, you decided to just paint over the cracks and hope it held together until the check cleared." I turned to Marcus, who was standing quietly a few feet away, holding his leather portfolio. "Are we done here?" I asked him. "We are done here, Eli," Marcus said. He gave Caleb one final clinical look. "Do not contact my client again. Any communication regarding the patent, the stolen files, or the impending federal investigation into your wire fraud needs to be directed to my office." We walked out of the warehouse together. Stepping out into the bright Thursday afternoon sun felt like waking up from a long, exhausting fever. We got into my truck. I put the keys in the ignition, but didn't turn it over right away. I just sat there, looking at the steering wheel. I sat in my car for a while. "You did the right thing," Marcus said quietly, from the passenger seat. He didn't use his lawyer voice. He used his supply sergeant voice. The one he used when things were truly bleak. "I know," I said, "but knowing you did the right thing doesn't make the air any easier to breathe." The fallout over the next 6 months was methodical, brutal, and entirely out of my hands. I didn't have to sue Caleb. Vanguard Horizon did it for me. They pierced his corporate veil with surgical precision. Because Caleb had knowingly signed fraudulent IP warranties to secure their investment, he was not protected by his LLC. They went after him personally for the $2.8 million. The Securities and Exchange Commission also opened an investigation into investor fraud. He had to liquidate everything. The venture capital firm took his apartment, his car, and his bank accounts. He avoided federal prison by taking a severe plea deal that barred him from acting as an executive or board member of any incorporated entity for 20 years, saddling him with a mountain of undischargeable restitution debt. He moved out of the city. I heard through a distant cousin that he took a job doing basic IT support for a logistics company somewhere in Ohio. We haven't spoken since the day the machine blew up on stage. We don't exchange holiday cards. As for the variable flow rotary valve, I didn't sell it to Vanguard Horizon. They approached me, of course. Sterling called Marcus directly, offering to buy the patent outright or fund my own startup. I told Marcus to decline. I had no interest in sitting in glass conference rooms or learning how to read venture capital term sheets. Instead, I licensed the design to an established, incredibly boring industrial manufacturing firm in Germany. They pay me a quiet, steady royalty. It's enough money that I could have closed my cinder block shop in the Menomonee Valley forever. I could have bought a house on a lake and spent the rest of my days fishing. But I didn't. I still go to the shop every morning. I still park in the same spot, walk past the same cracked concrete, and smell the same hot metal and cutting fluid. The building is quieter now. I only take on the jobs I want to take, mostly complex aerospace components that require a human touch, not just a line of code. A millimeter is a canyon, if you know how to look at it. I look back at the years I spent teaching Caleb, and I wonder if I missed a microscopic fracture early on. I wonder if I measured his character wrong, or if I just applied the wrong kind of pressure. Some days, I wonder if I did the right thing by letting him walk all the way out onto that stage before cutting the rope. Most days, I know I did. That's enough. You can't fix every piece of broken material. Sometimes, you just have to sweep it into the scrap bin and sweep the floor clean. Yesterday, I finished assembling version 7.1 of the rotary valve on my workbench. I machined every single part myself. I included the 0.04-inch asymmetrical offset in the main housing. I hooked it up to the test bench and pressurized it to 3,500 RPM. It ran perfectly. It didn't scream. It didn't vibrate. It just hummed. A low, steady, beautiful hum. I stood in the empty shop listening to it. The silence around the machine had weight to it, but it wasn't a heavy, suffocating weight anymore. It was just peaceful. I reached into the pocket of my canvas apron and pulled out the battered pine box. I unlatched it and took out my 1978 Mitutoyo dial caliper. I didn't measure anything. I just held it in my hand, feeling the familiar weight of a tool that never lies. I put on the apron. Old habit. I turned on the lathe, not to make anything, just to hear it. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.